Most of the distance that grows between parents and their adult children doesn't come from one dramatic event. It doesn't come from a single argument, a single wrong thing said. It comes from patterns, small, repeated patterns that were never meant to cause harm, but did. Patterns that were almost always rooted in love, but landed as something else. Today, we're going to name 10 of those patterns, not to assign blame, not to yours and not to theirs, but because you cannot change what you cannot see, and because the moment you recognize something, you have a choice you didn't have before. Part 1. The first 5 mistakes. Mistake 1. Taking the relationship for granted. There is a belief that most parents carry, usually without knowing they carry it, that the relationship with their child is permanent in a way that other relationships are not, that it cannot be broken, not really, not all the way, that whatever happens, the bond will hold. For most of human history, that belief was essentially true. Family ties were structural, enforced by proximity, by economics, by social expectation. Children stayed near their parents because the world was built that way. That world is gone. Adult children today have something no generation before them had quite so clearly: the genuine freedom to choose how much contact to maintain with their parents. Not just geographically, emotionally, logistically, entirely. Researchers studying family estrangement have found that rates of adult children cutting off or significantly limiting contact with parents have risen substantially over the past 2 decades. The relationship with your adult child is not guaranteed by the fact that you gave them life. It is maintained, or not, by the quality of what happens between you, day after day, year after year. When parents take that relationship for granted, they stop tending to it. They stop noticing when something seems off. They stop making the small investments that keep a relationship healthy over time. And slowly, without anyone intending it, the relationship thins. The shift is simple, even if it isn't easy. Start treating your relationship with your adult child the way you would treat a friendship you wanted to keep, with attention, with care, with the understanding that it needs something from you regularly, not just when something goes wrong. Mistake 2. Becoming defensive when they try to tell you something. At some point, maybe recently, maybe years ago, your adult child tried to tell you something. Maybe they brought up something from their childhood that hurt them. Maybe they said they felt unheard, or pressured, or criticized in ways they didn't want to be. Maybe they brought it up gently, carefully, with all the diplomacy of someone who wasn't sure how it would land. And what happened? For most parents, what happened is defensiveness. Not because you're a bad person, but because what they were saying felt like an accusation. And when something feels like an accusation, the instinct is to explain, to clarify, to remind them of everything you were managing at the time, everything you sacrificed, to say, in one form or another, that's not how it was. Here is the problem. When your adult child comes to you with feedback or a hurt, and you respond with explanation rather than listening, the message they receive is, "Your experience is not as real to me as my need to defend myself," and they file that away. The next time they consider bringing something difficult to you, they remember how the last time went, and they decide not to. The shift is not to agree with everything they say. It is simply to listen first, fully, without preparing your response while they're still talking. To ask one question before you say anything else. Can you tell me more? Disagreement lands very differently when it comes after genuine listening than when it arrives as the first response. Mistake 3. Using guilt to stay connected. It usually sounds like this. "Oh, it's fine. I know you're busy. I just wasn't sure you'd call. You've been so hard to reach. It's been 6 weeks, but I understand." Every parent who has ever said something like this knows the feeling underneath it, the loneliness, the genuine ache of missing your child and not knowing how to say that without making them pull away. So instead of saying it directly, you say it sideways. Here is what the research tells us about guilt as a relational strategy. It works in the short term. Guilt does produce calls. It does produce visits, but it produces the wrong kind. When your adult child calls because they feel guilty, they are not calling because they want to. They are calling to make the feeling stop. And over time, that knowledge changes how the calls feel, from something they want to something they owe, from pleasure to obligation, and obligation, when it accumulates without relief, eventually becomes resentment. The shift is to say what you actually mean, not, "I wasn't sure you'd call," but, "I've been thinking about you. I'd love to hear how you're doing." Direct, honest, and free of the invisible cost. Your child can feel the love in that without feeling trapped by it. Mistake 4. Criticizing the people they have chosen to trust. Your adult child has a life organized, in large part, around people who are not you, a spouse, close friends, perhaps a therapist. These are the people they call when something goes wrong. And for many parents, watching their child turn toward these relationships, instead of toward them, can feel like a kind of loss. Sometimes that feeling of loss comes out as criticism. The spouse who isn't good enough, the friend who is a bad influence, the therapist who is putting ideas in their head. Sometimes it's direct, sometimes it's subtle, a raised eyebrow, a careful hesitation, well, I just hope they're giving you good advice. And every single time, it costs you something. When you criticize the people your adult child has chosen to trust, they make a quiet internal calculation. Is this a safe place to bring the full truth of my life? And if they've learned that mentioning their spouse's name means the conversation will veer toward criticism, they stop bringing it up. They keep that whole part of their life separate from you. You don't lose the relationship, but you lose access to it. You get the version they think you can handle, not the version that's actually true. The shift is to stay curious instead of critical. When your child mentions someone in their life, ask, "What do you appreciate about them?" That question keeps doors open. Criticism closes them. Mistake 5. Giving advice that wasn't asked for. You have something your adult children don't have yet: the view from further along. You've lived through difficulty, through loss, through the way certain mistakes compound over time. And when you watch your child heading towards something you recognize, the urge to say something is almost overwhelming. That urge comes from love. It is real and it is good. But here is what your adult child hears when you offer advice they didn't ask for: "I don't trust you to figure this out on your own." Over time, that message changes what they bring to you. They stop sharing things they're working through because they know that sharing something unresolved will produce advice. They start presenting only the finished versions of their life to you, the completed decisions, because those are the only things that won't invite the commentary they're trying to avoid. The shift is to ask before you offer. Simply, do you want to think through this together, or did you mostly need to say it out loud? Most of the time, when your adult child brings you a problem, they are not looking for a solution. They are looking to be heard. When you give them that first, you become the kind of parent they want to call when something is hard, not the kind they avoid. Part 2. The next 5 mistakes. Mistake 6. Making your child the measure of your happiness. Many parents, particularly after retirement, after the death of a spouse, after the quieting of the social world that work once provided, find that their adult child has become the primary source of meaning in their life, the one whose call makes the day better and whose silence makes it hollow. There is nothing wrong with loving your child this way, but when a parent's happiness becomes visibly dependent on their child's behavior, the child begins to feel the weight of it, not all at once, gradually. They start to notice that when they're busy, something in their parent's voice changes. They start to sense that the relief when they do call is a little larger than a simple conversation should produce. And they begin to understand that their presence or absence has consequences that reach into their parents' entire sense of how things are. When someone's happiness depends on you in a way you cannot control, you stop feeling like a source of joy and start feeling like a source of responsibility. And responsibility, without relief, eventually becomes distance. The shift is not to stop loving your child. It is to build a life that does not depend entirely on them for its meaning. Something that makes your days full in a way that has nothing to do with whether your child called. Because when you have other sources of aliveness in your life, you stop placing an invisible burden on the relationship. You become someone your child can enjoy, rather than someone they have to maintain. Mistake 7. Holding on to the old role. For most of the years you spent parenting, your role was clear. You were the one who knew, who decided, who protected, who corrected, and you were good at that role. But your child grew up. The role stopped fitting. They became adults who make their own decisions and live with their own consequences. And the relationship needed to change with them. When parents hold on to the old role, when they continue to parent an adult the way they parented a teenager, it creates a specific kind of friction. The adult child feels condescended to, seen as less capable than they are. And that feeling, even when nothing dramatic is said, creates a low-level resistance in the relationship, a wish to limit contact because contact tends to feel diminishing. The shift is to ask yourself honestly, am I relating to who my child is now or to who they used to be? The new role is quieter. It listens more than it advises. It trusts more than it corrects. And it produces a relationship your adult child actually wants to be in. Mistake 8. Keeping score. Most parents would say they don't keep score, and most of them would be telling the truth as they understand it. But keeping score is often invisible, even to the person doing it. It shows up in the memory of who called last and how long ago, in the accounting of what you've given and what hasn't been returned, in the feeling that accumulates when something you did went unacknowledged, when an invitation was declined. None of those things, on their own, are significant. But when they are noted, even silently, they accumulate into a posture, a slight withholding, a subtle coolness the other person can feel but cannot name, a relationship that has, without any formal declaration, become transactional. Your adult child feels it. They may not be able to say what they feel, but they feel the difference between a parent who loves them freely and a parent whose love has fine print. The shift is to notice when you are tracking and to make a deliberate choice not to let what you've tracked change how you show up. To give what you give because you choose to, not as an investment that earns you something in return. That kind of giving is the only kind that creates real closeness. Mistake 9. Trying to be needed instead of wanted. There is a difference between being needed and being wanted, and it matters enormously. When you are needed, you are useful. When you are wanted, you are loved. And the strategies that produce one do not always produce the other. Many parents, as they feel their role in their children's lives becoming smaller, reach for usefulness as a way back in. They offer to babysit, to help with projects, to cook meals, to solve problems, because availability and helpfulness feel like a version of connection, and they are. But they can also become a subtle form of pressure. When a parent's primary mode of relating to their adult child is through what they can do for them, The child starts to feel that the relationship is conditional on their needs. And sometimes, this is the harder truth, the child starts to sense that their parent needs to be needed, that the relationship is less about them and more about the parent's own sense of purpose. And that feeling, even when it's never spoken, creates distance. The shift is to relate to your child, not from a place of, here's what I can do for you, but from a place of genuine curiosity about who they are. Not what you can fix, not what they might need, just them, their thoughts, their experiences, their life as they're actually living it. Mistake 10. Defining your worth by how they treat you. This is the deepest mistake on this list, and in some ways, it is the one that underlies all the others. When a parent's sense of their own value is tied to how their adult child behaves, something goes wrong at a fundamental level. It goes wrong because the parent cannot listen clearly. When your child gives you feedback, and that feedback feels like an attack on your worth rather than information about the relationship, you can only defend against it, and your child sees that defense and learns that you cannot truly be reached. It goes wrong because the parent cannot be a steady presence. When your emotional state rises and falls with every call, every visit, every sign of warmth or withdrawal, you become unpredictable, and unpredictability is exhausting to be close to. And it goes wrong because the parent stops being able to see their child clearly. When everything your child does is filtered through the question of what it means about you, about your worth, your adequacy, you stop seeing them. You start seeing only a mirror. And people do not want to be mirrors for their parents. They want to be people. The shift is the hardest work on this list. It is the work of grounding your sense of worth in something your child cannot give and cannot take away, in a life well lived, in relationships cultivated outside of family, in the simple, hard-won knowledge that you are enough, not because your child calls on Sundays, but because you are. When you build that kind of ground under your own feet, something changes. You stop needing something from your child that the relationship was never designed to provide, and your child, who has always wanted to love you freely, without cost, finally can. 10 mistakes, and you may have recognized yourself in some of them, perhaps in ways that were uncomfortable. None of these make you a bad parent. Every one of them is rooted in love. The defensiveness comes from caring so much that criticism feels unbearable. The guilt comes from missing your child. The unsolicited advice comes from wanting to protect them. These are not the mistakes of parents who didn't love enough. They are the mistakes of parents who loved and didn't always know what to do with it. You don't have to fix everything at once. You can simply decide, today, to listen a little longer before responding, to make one call that isn't about logistics, but about genuine curiosity, to ask one question you've never asked before, small, consistent, over time. That is what changes things. Before you go, one question. Of the 10 mistakes we talked about today, which one felt most familiar to you? Not the most comfortable one, the most familiar, the one that made you think, I know exactly what that looks like in my own life. Leave it in the comments. Because naming something, even once, to even one other person, is the first step toward changing it. And if someone else's comment resonates with you, tell them. The hardest parts of this are easier when you're not carrying them alone. This has been Family Bonds After 60. Take care of yourself, and remember, the most important relationship you will ever work on is still the one right in front of you.